Welcome back to Forgotten Empires, Bedtime History. Before you get comfortable, tonight we travel to the banks of the Nile, to a civilization so ancient, so vast, so impossibly advanced, that we are still trying to understand it 3,000 years later. Tonight's story is ancient Egypt, the civilization that defied time itself. If you enjoy falling asleep to the greatest stories ever told, hit subscribe and leave a like. New stories drop every 3 to 4 days. Tell us in the comments, what city are you writing from tonight? We love knowing where in the world our listeners are drifting off to sleep. Now, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let the Nile carry you back 5,000 years. Ancient Egypt, the civilization that defied time. Close your eyes. Imagine standing on the eastern bank of the Nile River. The sun is rising. Slowly, slowly, it climbs above the desert horizon, turning the sky from black to deep purple, from purple to rose, from rose to gold. And as the light reaches across the water, it touches something on the western bank, something impossible, a triangle of stone, so large it seems to belong to another world, its surface smooth and white, gleaming in the morning light, like a second sun rising from the earth. This is the Great Pyramid of Giza, the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the only one still standing. It was built 4,500 years ago, and it was already ancient when Rome was founded, already ancient when the Trojan War was fought, already ancient when Moses led his people out of this very land. This is Egypt, and this is its story. Part 1. The Gift of the Nile. Every great civilization needs a river. Mesopotamia had the Tigris and Euphrates. China had the Yellow River, India had the Indus, and Egypt had the Nile. But the Nile was not just any river. It was the longest river on Earth, running 4,000 miles from the mountains of Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. And every year, without fail, it flooded. Not in the destructive, terrifying way that other rivers flood, but gently, predictably, generously. Every summer, the rains in the mountains of Ethiopia swelled the Nile's tributaries, and the floodwaters flowed north, slowly, spreading across the desert on either side of the river. When they receded, they left behind a gift, a thin layer of dark, rich, fertile silt. In the middle of the Sahara Desert, one of the most hostile environments on Earth, the Nile created a ribbon of life, green and abundant and impossibly fertile amid the endless sand. The Egyptians called it the Black Land, Kemet, and beyond it, the Red Land, the desert, the place of death. Everything that Egypt was, everything it became, was shaped by this simple geography. The river gave them food, the desert protected them, the Nile connected north and south, and the flooding, the annual predictable flooding, taught them something that would define their civilization forever. That the world runs in cycles, that death is followed by rebirth, that the sun sets only to rise again. Part 2. The First Dynasty. For thousands of years before the Pharaohs, people lived along the Nile, small farming villages, simple communities, people who grew grain and herded cattle and buried their dead with offerings for the life to come. Slowly, over centuries, these villages grew. They merged and competed and conquered each other, until 2 great kingdoms emerged, Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. For a time, they existed separately, but around the year 3100 BC, a king from Upper Egypt marched north and unified the two kingdoms into a single state. His name was Narmer, or perhaps Menes. History is not entirely sure, but what history is sure of is what he created: the world's first nation-state, a centralized government ruling over millions of people, a single king, the pharaoh, supreme over all, divine, absolute, eternal. From this moment, Egyptian civilization would endure for 3,000 years. 3,000 years. To put that in perspective, the time between Narmer and Cleopatra is longer than the time between Cleopatra and us. Part 3. The Pharaoh, Living God. At the heart of Egyptian civilization was an idea so powerful it held the kingdom together for millennia. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god, living on earth in human form, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky, and at death, becoming Osiris, the god of the afterlife. This was not metaphor, this was not poetry. The Egyptians believed it literally. The pharaoh did not simply rule Egypt, he maintained Ma'at, the cosmic order that kept the universe in balance. If the pharaoh was weak or unjust, the Nile might not flood, the crops might fail, chaos might consume the world. The pharaoh's role was to hold back chaos every single day, through ritual and prayer, through justice and strength, through the proper worship of the gods. It was an enormous responsibility, and it shaped everything about Egyptian society. Part 4. Building for Eternity. If the pharaoh was eternal, then his monuments must be eternal too. And so the Egyptians built in the only material that truly lasts: stone. Not the mud brick that other civilizations used, not wood, not bronze. Stone. Massive, immovable, permanent stone. Designed to last not for decades or centuries, but forever. The story of Egyptian architecture begins with a man named Imhotep. He served the pharaoh Djoser around the year 2650 BC. He was an architect, and a physician, and a poet, and a priest. He was, by almost any measure, the first true genius in recorded history. Before Imhotep, Egyptian tombs were low, flat structures made of mud brick, called mastabas, simple and functional, nothing remarkable. Imhotep looked at the mastaba and thought bigger. What if you stacked one mastaba on top of another, and another, and another? The result was the step pyramid of Saqqara, the world's first large-scale stone structure, standing 60 meters tall, visible for miles across the desert. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen, and it was only the beginning. Within a few generations, Egyptian architects had perfected the pyramid: smooth sides instead of steps, gleaming white limestone, oriented precisely to the cardinal directions. And around the year 2560 BC, the pharaoh Khufu commissioned the greatest building project in human history: the Great Pyramid of Giza. 2.5 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, assembled with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to explain. The four sides aligned to the compass points with an accuracy of less than 1/10 of a degree. The base level across an area of 13 acres with a variation of less than 2 centimeters, built in approximately 20 years, by a workforce of perhaps 20,000 people. Not slaves, as was once believed. Recent archaeological evidence suggests they were skilled workers, paid in bread and beer, given medical care when they were injured, buried with honor near the pyramid when they died. They knew what they were building, and they were proud of it. Part 5. The Gods of Egypt. No civilization has ever worshipped more gods than ancient Egypt. Scholars have counted over 2,000 Egyptian deities. Some were great cosmic forces, some were local gods of specific towns, some were protectors of specific activities, of childbirth, of scribes, of beer. But a few stood above all others. Ra, the sun god, the most important deity in the Egyptian pantheon. Each morning, Ra sailed across the sky in his solar bark. Each evening, he descended into the underworld to do battle with Apophis, the serpent of chaos. And each morning, he rose again. The eternal cycle of night and day, death and rebirth. Osiris, god of the afterlife, the murdered god who was resurrected, king of the dead, judge of souls. His story was the central myth of Egyptian religion. He was killed by his jealous brother Set. His body scattered across the land. His wife Isis gathered the pieces, and through her magic, he lived again, not in this world, but in the next. This myth told the Egyptians everything they needed to know about death, that it was not the end, that the righteous would live again. That love was stronger than death. Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, wife of Osiris, mother of Horus, the divine mother, protector of the dead, perhaps the most beloved deity in all of Egypt. Her worship eventually spread far beyond Egypt's borders, across the Roman Empire, all the way to Britain. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, guardian of the dead on their journey to the afterlife. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing and wisdom, keeper of divine records, inventor of language, patron of scribes. And Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, son of Osiris and Isis, avenger of his father, the living pharaoh on earth. Part 6. The Afterlife. Of all the things that made Egypt remarkable, perhaps none was more extraordinary than their obsession with death, or rather, with what came after. The Egyptians did not fear death. They prepared for it, planned for it, invested enormous resources in it, because they believed with absolute certainty that death was not the end. It was a transition, a journey from this world to the next. And if you prepared properly, if you lived a righteous life, if your body was preserved, if the proper rituals were performed, you would live forever. The preparation began with mummification. The Egyptians understood, perhaps intuitively, that the soul needed the body to return to, and so they developed techniques to preserve the body for eternity. The process took 70 days. First, the internal organs were removed. The lungs, stomach, intestines, and liver placed in special jars, canopic jars, to be buried alongside the body. The brain was extracted through the nostrils and discarded. The Egyptians thought with their hearts, not their heads. The heart remained in the body, because it would be needed for judgment. Then the body was packed in natron, a natural salt, and left to dry for 40 days, then wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen bandages, with amulets and charms tucked between the layers for protection on the journey ahead. Finally, placed in a coffin, and then another coffin, and sometimes another, each one more elaborate than the last, painted with spells and prayers from the Book of the Dead, guides for the journey through the underworld. The judgment of the soul was called the weighing of the heart. In the Hall of Two Truths, the dead person's heart was placed on a scale. On the other side of the scale, a feather, the feather of Maat, the feather of truth and justice. If the heart was heavy with sin, it outweighed the feather, and the soul was devoured by Ammit, a terrifying creature, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, gone forever. But if the heart was pure, if a life had been lived with truth and kindness and justice, the heart balanced the feather, and the soul passed through into the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, a place of eternal peace and plenty, where the Nile always flooded, where the crops always grew, where family and friends waited, where life continued forever. Part 7. The New Kingdom, Egypt at its peak. Egyptian history is divided into three great periods: the Old Kingdom, the Age of Pyramids, the Middle Kingdom, the Age of Literature and Trade, and the New Kingdom, the Age of Empire, from roughly 1550 to 1070 BC. Egypt reached the height of its power. Its armies marched south into Nubia and north into the Levant. Its trade networks reached Mesopotamia and the Aegean. Its temples grew to impossible scale, and its pharaohs became legends. Hatshepsut, one of the most remarkable rulers in history, a woman who became pharaoh. In a civilization that had always been ruled by men, Hatshepsut took the throne around 1478 BC and ruled for over 20 years. She wore the traditional pharaoh's false beard. She used the masculine titles. She presented herself in statues as a man, not because she was confused about her identity, but because she understood that the role of pharaoh required it. She was extraordinarily capable. She launched trading expeditions to the land of Punt, perhaps modern-day Somalia, returning with gold and ivory and frankincense and myrrh. She built temples of breathtaking beauty. She maintained peace and prosperity. After her death, her successor tried to erase her from history. Her images were defaced. Her name was chiseled from monuments. But he failed, because the stones remembered, and 3,000 years later, she stands again, one of the greatest rulers Egypt ever had. Thutmose III, her successor and stepson, who spent years in her shadow before emerging as perhaps the greatest military commander in Egyptian history. He fought 17 campaigns in 20 years, extending Egyptian power further than it had ever reached. He has been called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, who did the unthinkable. In a civilization with 2,000 gods, he declared there was only one, the Aten, the disk of the sun. He closed the temples of the other gods. He moved the capital to a new city he built himself. He tried to reshape 3,000 years of religion in a single lifetime. He failed. After his death, his reforms were reversed. His name was erased from monuments. His city was abandoned. But his son became one of the most famous pharaohs in history, not because of what he accomplished, but because of what was found in his tomb. His name was Tutankhamun, King Tut. He died at 19, and his tomb, undisturbed for over 3,000 years, was discovered in 1922, filled with treasures beyond imagination. Ramesses II, the Great, who ruled for 66 years, who fought the Hittites to a standstill at Kadesh and then negotiated the world's first known peace treaty, who built more temples and statues than any other pharaoh, who had over 100 children, who lived to 90 years old in an age when most people died at 30, and who ordered his name carved so deeply into every monument he could find that it could never be erased. He almost succeeded. Even today, walking through the temples of Egypt, you cannot go far without seeing his name. Ramesses, 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 still shouting across the millennia. Part 8. The Long Decline. But even Egypt could not last forever. After Ramesses II, the power slowly faded. The Sea Peoples invaded from the Mediterranean. The Nubians conquered from the south. The Assyrians swept in from the north. The Persians, the Greeks, and finally, Rome. In 30 BC, the last pharaoh of Egypt died. Her name was Cleopatra VII. She was not Egyptian by blood. She was Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. But she was Egyptian in every other way. She was the first ruler of her dynasty to bother learning the Egyptian language. She worshipped the Egyptian gods. She understood the Egyptian people. She fought with extraordinary intelligence and courage to preserve Egyptian independence. First through her alliance with Julius Caesar, then through her relationship with Mark Antony. But Rome was too powerful. And when Mark Antony's fleet was defeated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, the game was over. Rather than be paraded through Rome as a captive, Cleopatra chose death. The exact method is debated. The famous story of the asp, the Egyptian cobra, may or may not be true, but the result was the same. Egypt became a Roman province. 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization came to an end. Epilogue: what remains? And yet, Egypt did not truly die. Walk into any museum in the world and you will find Egypt. Its art in every collection, its mummies in glass cases, its hieroglyphics on papyrus that has survived 4,000 years. The pyramids still stand. After 4.5 millennia, they still stand. When Napoleon's soldiers saw the Great Pyramid in 1798, one of them calculated that there was enough stone in the 3 Giza pyramids to build a wall 3 meters high and 1 meter thick all the way around France. The Sphinx still watches the horizon, its face worn smooth by time and sand and wind, but still there, still watching, as it has watched for 4,500 years. The ancient Egyptians believed in eternal life, and in a way, they achieved it, not through mummification, not through the field of reeds, but through something more powerful: memory. As long as we remember them, as long as we speak their names, as long as we stand in wonder before what they built, they live. Imhotep lives, Hatshepsut lives, Ramesses lives, Cleopatra lives. The civilization that built monuments to eternity achieved exactly what it set out to achieve. It became eternal. Sleep now. Let the Nile carry you. Imagine the warm desert wind, the smell of lotus flowers on the water, the distant sound of priests chanting in a temple lit by torchlight, a world of golden sand and blue sky, and a river that never stopped giving. A civilization that looked at death and decided it was not the end. That looked at time and decided to outlast it. Good night, and remember, every empire believed it would last forever. None of them did. But Egypt came the closest of all. 3,000 years. Good night.